The morning of October 14th looked like every other morning at the Whitmore estate. Pale autumn light filtered through the tall windows of the kitchen, casting long gold rectangles across the hardwood floor. The coffee machine hummed its familiar rhythm. Somewhere outside, a pair of red maples had begun to let go of their leaves, and they drifted down slowly past the glass like small flames going out one by one. James Whitmore sat at the head of the breakfast table, his jacket already on his tie, already straight. He was the kind of man who was never fully still, even when sitting down. His eyes moved across the morning newspaper without really reading it. His right hand turned a pen slowly between his fingers, a habit from years of boardrooms and negotiations and long silences that needed to be filled with something. He was 42 years old. He had built his company from a single property deal in his mid-20s, a small commercial building in Hartford that most investors had written off as a lost cause. He had seen something in it that no one else had seen. That was the story of his life, really. Seeing what others missed, knowing when something was worth believing in and when it was not. The estate in Greenwich had come later after the company had grown past what he had originally imagined. 14 rooms, a long driveway lined with oak trees that turned deep red every fall, a kitchen large enough that two people could work in it without ever crossing paths. He had designed that kitchen himself, working alongside the architect for 3 months, insisting on the particular placement of the windows so that morning light would come in from the east and fill the room by 7 o'clock, regardless of the season. He had cared about that once. The morning light, the quality of the silence in an early house before the day found its noise. He had lived alone in the estate for 3 years after his divorce. The divorce had been civil and mutual and deeply exhausting in the way that endings are exhausting when both people involved are too tired to be angry anymore. He had given her the apartment in the city because she loved the city, and he had never really belonged to it. He had kept the house because it was the place he had built with his own ideas and his own decisions, and he was not yet ready to let go of the version of himself that had believed in it. Then 14 months ago, he had met Serena Voss. They had been introduced at a charity event in Westport, the kind of event that James attended because his presence was expected and occasionally useful, not because he enjoyed them. She had been standing near the window with a glass of wine, not working the room, the way most people worked rooms at these things, just standing there with a particular ease that he had found in the moment very attractive. They had talked for an hour. She was 34, intelligent, and she laughed at exactly the right moments. She had asked him about the company with genuine curiosity, or what appeared to be genuine curiosity, and she had told him about her own work in arts administration with a self-deprecating warmth that made her seem unguarded in a way that felt rare. He had called her 2 days later. The wedding was 2 weeks away. On the far side of the kitchen, Sandra Marsh moved quietly between the counter and the sink, rinsing dishes and stacking them with the careful efficiency of someone who had learned long ago how to be present without being noticed. She had worked at the estate for 4 years. She was reliable and honest, and she never asked for more than she was given, which was one of the reasons James trusted her completely. She was a woman of 40 who had raised her daughter largely alone and had done it without complaint and without bitterness, which James had always respected more than he had found the words to express. Her daughter Ellie was seated in the small chair near the window, the one James had brought in from the study, because Ellie had once mentioned without complaint that she liked being near the light. She was 6 years old. She had her mother's dark eyes and her mother's quiet way of observing a room without appearing to look at anything in particular. On her lap was a small sketch pad. She was drawing something with a short green pencil, her tongue pressed between her teeth in concentration. James glanced at her briefly and almost smiled. The house felt calm. It felt the way a house is supposed to feel on an ordinary morning when the light is good and the coffee is warm and nothing has yet arrived to disturb it. He reached for his coffee cup. He drank. He set it down. He reached for the toast. The butter dish sat in the center of the table, white porcelain with a small silver lid. Serena had started buying it from a specialty shop in the village about 3 months ago. She had insisted the quality was better, that there was a difference you could taste. James had not argued. He rarely argued about things that small. He had sat down to it every morning and spread it on his toast and thought nothing more about it than that it was butter on toast, the most ordinary thing in the world. He lifted the lid and picked up the butter knife. "Sir." The voice was so quiet that for a moment he thought he had imagined it. He looked up. Ellie was standing beside the table. She had crossed the kitchen without making a sound. Her sketch pad was still in her left hand pressed against her side. Her right hand was held carefully in front of her fingers together the way a child holds their hands when they are about to say something they have practiced and are not sure will be received. James set the knife down slowly. "Good morning, Ellie," he said. She did not answer the greeting. She looked at the butter dish, then she looked at him. "Someone is poisoning you, sir," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Please don't eat the butter." The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. James heard the coffee machine finish its cycle with a small hiss of steam. He heard a leaf press briefly against the window outside and then fall away. He heard Sandra stop moving at the sink. The absence of that small sound was somehow louder than the sound itself had been. He looked at the little girl standing beside his breakfast table with her sketch pad in her hand and her face absolutely serious, and he felt something that was not quite worry and not quite disbelief, but something that lived in the space between them, something that made him set the butter knife down with more care than the action required. "What did you say?" he asked. "Please don't eat the butter," Ellie repeated. "She put something in it. Last night, I saw her." James placed both hands flat on the table. He kept his voice very calm. It was the voice he used in difficult meetings, the voice that did not give anything away, the voice that kept everything orderly and measured, while the mind behind it ran very fast. "Who put something in it?" Ellie looked at the hallway that led toward the bedrooms. Then she looked back at him. "Miss Serena," she said. The name landed in the room like something dropped from a height. James did not speak for a moment. He looked at the butter dish, at the smooth, pale surface inside it, at the small silver knife resting beside his plate. Then he looked at Ellie again. "Tell me what you saw," he said. "Exactly. Take your time." Ellie pulled the chair next to him a few inches closer and sat on the edge of it. She held her sketch pad in her lap with both hands, the way a child holds something for comfort when there is no other comfort available. "I woke up because I was thirsty," she said. "It was dark outside. The clock in the hallway said one something. I came downstairs to get water from the kitchen." She paused. The light under the cabinet was on. The small one. The one that stays on at night. "I stopped at the door because I heard something." "What did you hear?" "A sound like something being tapped on the counter, very quiet, over and over." She looked at her hands. Miss Serena was standing at the counter near the refrigerator. She had her purse on the counter beside her. She took out a small white bottle, the kind medicine comes in, the kind with the cap you have to push and turn. James was very still. "She looked at her phone first," Ellie continued. "She stood there for a while just looking at it. Then she put the phone back in her purse and opened the bottle. She took something out and put it on the counter and used the back of a spoon to crush it. She pressed down slowly, back and forth, until it was all powder." Ellie paused again, making sure she had the sequence right. Then she opened the butter dish and mixed the powder in. She stirred it carefully, and then she used the back of the spoon to make it smooth again, so it looked the same as before. Silence. "Then she put everything back in her purse and turned off the small light," Ellie said, "and she went back upstairs." James looked at Sandra, who had turned from the sink and was standing very still with a dish towel in her hands and an expression of pale, careful fear on her face. The fear of a woman who is understanding something and wishing she were not. He looked back at Ellie. "Did she see you?" he asked. Ellie nodded slowly. "She turned around when I was at the door. I think I moved without meaning to. She saw me." A brief pause. "She wasn't angry. She called me over. She crouched down and talked to me quietly like she was telling me a secret. She said grown-ups sometimes have things they take care of at night. She said it was medicine for you. She said it would help you sleep better and that your heart had been working too hard." Ellie's voice did not waver, but her hands tightened slightly on the sketch pad. "Then she gave me money. She took it out of her purse, a lot of it. She said if I didn't tell anyone, she would give my mom enough so she wouldn't have to worry so much. She said we could find a nicer place to live, a better school for me." "And you said yes?" James asked without judgment. "I said okay," Ellie replied, "but I didn't mean it." Another silence, longer than the others. James looked at the table in front of him. The newspaper, half read, folded open to the business section. The coffee still warm in its cup. The plate with 2 slices of toast in the small pat of butter, melting slowly at the edges, soaking into the bread in the particular way butter does when the bread is warm and the room is at a certain temperature. He breathed in once carefully. He was a man who had been deceived before. In business, you learn to expect it. You built your decisions around the possibility of it the way you build a structure around the possibility of weather. Someone always wanted more than they were entitled to. Someone always believed that the rules governing ordinary people were not quite meant for them specifically. He had been burned before, and he had rebuilt, and he had continued because that was the only available response, and he had always understood that clearly. But this was different from any of that. This was his breakfast table. This was the house he came home to. This was the woman who had stayed up late with him 3 weeks ago, helping him draft a difficult letter to a board member who had gone off course, who had laughed at something he said in the dark after they turned the lights off, who had driven 40 minutes in the rain on a Tuesday to bring him dinner at the office because she had heard in his voice that he was running on nothing and she did not want him to do that alone. He thought about all of those things. Then he set them aside. He could examine them later. He could afford to feel them later. Right now, he needed to know if the child was telling the truth. "Ellie," he said quietly, "I'm going to ask you something very simple, and I need you to be completely honest with me, even if the answer is complicated." She nodded. "Are you certain about what you saw? Are you certain you understood what she was doing?" Ellie did not hesitate. She did not look away. "Yes, sir." She crushed the pills with the spoon and mixed them into the butter and smoothed the top so it looked the same as before. "I was standing right there in the doorway. I could see everything. I wasn't dreaming, and I wasn't confused." James was quiet for a moment, looking at her. Then he asked her something that surprised even himself. "If I told you I wanted to find out whether you were right," he said, "how would you do it?" Ellie looked at the toast on his plate. She looked at the butter on it, at the way it had melted in slightly at the center. Then she looked at him with the particular gravity that only very small children and very old men seem capable of, the gravity of someone who has not yet learned to soften their certainty with social performance. "Make her eat it," she said. He stared at her. "The toast. If she puts something in there she won't eat it, she'll find a reason not to." Ellie looked at him steadily. "But if I'm wrong, it's just toast and nothing happens. That's how you know which one is true." James Whitmore had spent 20 years in rooms full of lawyers and advisors and consultants who were paid considerable amounts of money to think clearly under pressure, to cut to the operative question when everything around the operative question was noise. He had never been handed cleaner logic than that. He was still thinking about it when they heard the sound, heels on the staircase, a measured familiar rhythm, the rhythm he had woken to and gone to sleep to for 14 months. Then the soft click of the hallway door pushing open. Then Serena Voss walked into the kitchen. She was 34 years old. She moved through a room the way certain people do, with the casual awareness of someone who has learned that they will be noticed and has made peace with this and incorporated it. Her dark hair was down around her shoulders. She was wearing a pale blue blouse and dark trousers, and her expression was warm and slightly amused, the way it always was in the mornings, as though she had already found something gently funny about the day and was keeping it to herself. "You're still sitting there," she said to James, glancing at the unfinished breakfast. "You have the 7:30 call." "I was waiting," James said. His voice was perfectly even. Serena poured herself a coffee from the machine and glanced at Ellie with a brief, easy smile, the smile of someone accustomed to being pleasant to the children of household employees. Ellie had returned to her chair by the window and was looking at her sketch pad, her face down, her pencil moving. James picked up the slice of toast. He held it for a moment, feeling the warmth of it, looking at the butter that had spread across its surface in the way butter spreads when it has been softened before application, when it goes on easily and evenly without tearing the bread. He set it down. He looked at Serena. "Why don't you try a bite first?" he said. Serena turned from the counter. "What?" "The toast. You're always telling me to eat." He kept his voice light, almost playful, the voice of a man making a small domestic joke. "Show me how good it is." She laughed. It was a quick laugh, shallow in the way a laugh is when it is produced rather than arrived at. "James, I already had a yogurt before you came down. Eat your own breakfast." "Just one bite." He held the slice out toward her slightly. "Humor me. I'm curious what you think." Something changed in the room. It was not visible, exactly, not a thing you could point to. It was more like a change in atmospheric pressure, the way the air in a space adjusts when a window somewhere has been opened or closed, when the equilibrium shifts. Serena looked at the toast in his extended hand. Her smile stayed where it was on her face, but it stopped moving. It became fixed in place the way a smile looks in a photograph, rather than on a living person, static rather than alive. "I told you I'm not hungry," she said. The words came out with more weight behind them than the sentence required. She heard it herself. He watched her hear it. She looked at him for half a second, recalibrating something internal, and then the warmth returned to her face like a light being adjusted. "I have a lot to do today. The wedding planner at 10, then the florist. Please just eat so you're not late to your call." She set her coffee cup down on the counter, picked up her bag from the chair near the door, and walked toward the hallway. "I'll be back by 4, she said over her shoulder. "Don't skip lunch." The front door opened, the front door closed. The car started in the driveway, the engine turning over in that particular way it always did in the colder mornings, a little rough for the first few seconds, and then smoothing out. The sound of it moved down the long driveway and then diminished around the bend in the road, and then was gone entirely. James sat at the table and did not move. He was looking at the slice of toast still in his hand. He was thinking about the way her smile had stopped moving when he held it out to her. He was thinking about the fractional steps she had taken backward. He was thinking about the word no coming out of her mouth with too much weight behind it for such a simple request about such a simple thing. He was thinking about a woman who had spent 6 days last month helping him choose table centerpieces and chair arrangements for their wedding reception, and who would not eat one bite of bread. He set the toast back on the plate. He looked at Ellie. She was looking back at him. She had not drawn anything in the last several minutes. "You saw that," she said quietly. It was not a question. "Yes," he said. He reached for his phone. He called Owen Briggs. Owen had been his head of security for 7 years. He had come to James from a career in private investigations, the kind of work that requires a specific combination of patience, intelligence, and the ability to move through other people's lives without disturbing the surface. He was in his early 50s, compact with close-cut gray hair, and the careful, unhurried movements of someone trained to notice everything without reacting to most of it. He did not embellish. He did not speculate beyond what the evidence supported. He answered on the second ring. "I need something tested," James said. "Today, not tomorrow. Today." He looked at the butter dish sitting in the center of the table where it had sat every morning for the past 3 months. "And I need you to pull the kitchen security footage from last night, between midnight and 2 in the morning. Come through the side entrance and don't let anyone in the house system know you're accessing the archive." Owen was quiet for 2 seconds, absorbing this. "All right, 40 minutes. James ended the call. He stood up from the table. He went to the kitchen drawer near the sink, where Sandra kept the storage bags, took one out, and returned to the table. He picked up the butter dish with a folded napkin so that his own fingerprints did not touch the porcelain surface, fitted it into the bag with the lid on, and sealed the bag. He set it on the counter. He turned to Sandra. She had not moved from her position near the sink. She was holding the dish towel in both hands, and her knuckles were pale. "Sandra," he said gently, "are you all right?" She nodded, though the expression on her face said something that contradicted the nod. "Mr. Whitmore, I had no idea. If I had known anything, I would have told you immediately. I would never have allowed—" "I know that," he said. "You have nothing to apologize for, nothing at all." He kept his voice level and calm because she needed it to be, and because he needed it to be. "I need you to do one thing for me. Don't say anything about this to anyone today. Not a word, not even something small. Can you do that?" She nodded again, more firmly this time. He looked at Ellie, who had come back to the table and was standing beside her chair, watching him with those steady, dark eyes. "You did exactly the right thing telling me," he said. Ellie looked at the sealed bag on the counter. "Is she going to know I told you?" James thought about the answer carefully before giving it. "Not yet," he said. "She thinks you took the money and kept your word. We need her to keep thinking that. It's important that she does." Ellie considered this for a moment. Then she nodded slowly and deliberately, the nod of someone who has made a decision they intend to honor. Owen Briggs arrived 38 minutes later. He came through the side entrance that opened near the utility room, a route that ran along the east wall of the property and could not be seen from the main road or from the front of the house. He looked at the sealed bag James handed him without touching it, then looked at James with the particular steadiness of a man absorbing information that is changing the shape of a situation. "What are we looking for?" he asked. "Everything," James said. "Heart medication, sedatives, beta blockers. Anything that could be introduced into food or drink in small doses over a period of time without being immediately detectable. I need a preliminary result as fast as the lab can run it." Owen looked at him, not with alarm, but with the focused attention of a man recalibrating. "Private lab, independent. No connection to any hospital system or public record. I can have a preliminary by tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," James said. "First thing." Owen picked up the bag. "You mentioned the footage. Come with me." The security room was off the main study behind a door that most visitors assumed was a coat closet. It was small and cool and lined on one wall with a panel of monitors cycling through the estate's exterior and interior camera feeds. James had installed the system 4 years ago after a break-in at a property 2 miles away, the kind of event that makes you realize your sense of safety has been borrowed rather than earned. He sat at the panel and navigated to the archive. Camera 3, interior kitchen. He entered the date and set the start time to midnight. The screen showed the kitchen in the low ambient light of the under-cabinet strips that stayed on overnight. The counters, the table, the refrigerator, the butter dish with its silver lid centered on the table exactly as it had been every morning for the past 3 months. At 12 minutes past 1 in the morning, the hallway door opened. Serena walked in. She was wearing her silk robe, the dark one she always said was impractical. She moved without turning on the main lights, navigating in the dim glow of the cabinet strips, with the ease of a woman who knows a room well enough to move through it in the dark. She went to the counter near the refrigerator. She set her purse on the counter. She opened the flap. She took out her phone first. She held it in front of her, reading. Her face was tilted slightly down, expression neutral and focused. She stood there for approximately 30 seconds. Her thumb moved once across the screen. Then again, reading something or waiting for something or confirming something with someone on the other end of a message thread. Then she put the phone away. She reached into the purse and removed a small amber prescription bottle, the kind with a white child safety cap. She set it on the counter. She opened a nearby drawer and removed a spoon. She shook something from the bottle onto the counter, a single small white tablet, and began pressing the back of the spoon against it with careful measured pressure. The motion was practiced, the motion of someone who has done this before and knows exactly how much force is needed and exactly how long it takes. James leaned closer to the screen. She gathered the crushed powder on the spoon, carried it to the table, lifted the silver lid from the butter dish, and stirred the powder in with slow, deliberate strokes. Then she turned the spoon over and used the flat of it to restore the surface of the butter to its original smoothness. Careful, patient, methodical. She replaced the lid. She rinsed the spoon, dried it on the dish towel, put the bottle back in her purse. She looked around the kitchen, once a brief perimeter check, the look of someone making sure everything is as it should be. Then she walked back to the hallway door and pulled it closed behind her. The kitchen was empty again. The butter dish sat in the center of the table with its silver lid and its perfectly smooth surface, exactly as it had always looked. James did not move for a long time. He watched the empty screen. He replayed the footage from the beginning, watched it again, then a third time. Each time he paid particular attention to the phone, to the 30 seconds she stood reading it before she did anything, to the fact that she had been receiving information or instructions, not consulting her own notes. She had checked her phone before she acted. That single detail changed the shape of everything. Owen stood beside him without speaking until James turned off the monitor. "She checked her phone before starting," Owen said. "I know." James stood up from the chair. He walked to the door of the security room and stood with his hand on the frame, looking out toward the kitchen. "Find out who she's reporting to. That's what I need most right now." He went back to his desk and called his physician's office in Stamford, where he had been a patient for nearly 12 years. He asked for Dr. Alden specifically. He told the receptionist it was urgent. He was put on hold for 4 minutes, during which he sat very still and looked at the surface of his desk and thought about the Tuesday 3 weeks ago when he had gripped the edge of that desk because the room had tilted slightly and he had stood still until it passed and then poured himself a glass of water and gone back to work and not mentioned it to anyone. When Dr. Alden came on the line, James asked for the results of his most recent blood panel, the one from 6 weeks ago. Dr. Alden pulled the file. He read through the standard markers. Cholesterol normal, blood pressure within range. Then he paused. "There is one thing I flagged in my notes," Dr. Alden said. "Your resting heart rate was notably lower than your historical baseline, and there was a reading consistent with beta-adrenergic blocking agents at a subclinical level. At the time I noted it as a possible anomaly. I meant to follow up at your next visit." "Beta blockers," James said. "At a subclinical level, yes." "What are you telling me, James?" "I'm asking you a hypothetical question," James said. "If someone were introducing a small amount of a beta-blocking compound into a person's food consistently over a period of months at a gradually increasing dose, would the reading in that blood panel be consistent with that?" A long pause. "Yes," Dr. Alden said carefully. "At a low and gradually increasing dosage, it would present exactly as I described. And if the dosage continued to increase, the effects on cardiac function would become progressively serious. Irregular rhythm, hypotension, fatigue. Eventually, in a person not being specifically monitored for it, there would be a significant risk of a serious cardiac event. Would that event be distinguishable from natural causes in a standard autopsy?" An even longer pause. "James," Dr. Alden said. "I'll be in touch," James said. "Thank you." He ended the call. He sat at his desk in the quiet of his study and looked at the wood surface in front of him. At the pen he had left resting across the open notebook. At the framed photograph on the corner of the desk, which showed the original building in Hartford on the day the renovation was completed, a building that everyone else had written off and that he had seen differently. 6 weeks ago, the compound had been in his blood at a level low enough to appear anomalous. Something to watch, something to follow up on. He had felt tired that quarter. He had felt the tiredness, the way men his age feel of these things, attributing it to work and stress, and the accumulation of years of long days, the reasonable and ordinary explanations that a healthy man uses because he has no reason to look further. 3 months ago, Serena had begun insisting on making breakfast herself every morning. He thought about every morning for the past 3 months. The toast, the butter, the small silver lid lifted and replaced. He thought about the mornings he had fallen asleep briefly at his desk and thought it was the accumulation of late nights. He thought about the Tuesday with the tilting room. He thought about how tired he had felt at the board meeting last month, how he had put it down to travel and preparation and the pressure of the quarter. He had been doing this to himself every morning. He had sat down to it willingly. He had thanked her for it. He stood up and went to the window. Outside, the oak trees along the driveway stood very still in the windless morning. A crow landed on the stone wall, looked at something in the garden below it, and flew away. In 2 weeks, James was supposed to have been married. He turned away from the window and went back to the kitchen. Sandra was still there. She was working now, genuinely working, doing something with the dishes, because motion was easier than stillness when you were carrying something you could not put down. He went to Ellie. She was in her chair by the window. She looked up when he approached, and her expression was the expression of someone who has been waiting, not impatiently, but with the focused attention of someone who understands that waiting is currently the correct thing to do. He crouched down so they were at eye level. He kept his voice very quiet. "You told me the truth this morning," he said, "and everything I've found out since then confirms that what you saw was exactly what it appeared to be." Ellie looked at him steadily. She did not seem relieved exactly. She seemed as though she had already known it would come out this way and had simply been waiting for the confirmation. "Is she going to find out that you know?" she asked. "Not yet," he said. "She still believes you took the money and kept your word. I need her to keep believing that. It's the most important thing right now." Ellie was quiet for a moment, then, "So I have to pretend everything is normal?" "Yes," he said. He did not make it sound smaller than it was. "I know that's not easy. I know it feels wrong to act like nothing has changed when everything has. But sometimes the only way to stop someone from continuing to do something harmful is to let them believe for a little while longer that they haven't been seen." She thought about this for a moment. "Like when you know someone is bluffing," she said, "but you don't say so, so they keep playing and show you more." James looked at her for a long moment with something close to genuine surprise. "Yes," he said quietly, "exactly like that." She nodded. Her expression did not change. She picked up her green pencil and turned her eyes back to the sketch pad. James straightened up. He stood at the kitchen table and looked at the chair where he had sat every morning for the past 3 months with his newspaper and his coffee. He looked at the window. He looked at the clock on the wall, which said it was 20 minutes past 9. He went back to his study and called Owen. "The blood panel confirms it," he said. "The compound was in my blood 6 weeks ago at a lower concentration. She has been increasing the dose. This is not something that began recently. This is a plan, and it has been running for months." Owen was quiet for a moment, which means the timing was deliberate from the beginning. The insurance, the wedding date, the breakfast routine. Someone mapped the full sequence. "Someone advised her," James said. "Someone who understands the financial and legal mechanics of what they are trying to accomplish. I need you to find that person. Everything else waits until we know who's behind this." He paused. "And Owen, no one knows about any of this except you, me, Sandra, and Ellie. No one. Not until we have the full picture." "Understood. I'll start tonight." "How long for the lab?" "Preliminary tomorrow morning. Full panel the day after." "Tomorrow morning," James said. "First thing." He ended the call. He sat back in his chair. Outside his window, the October morning continued as though it were an ordinary October morning. A car moved along the road at the end of the driveway. A pair of leaves separated from the same branch and fell along the same invisible current of air before diverging. The sky was clear and pale blue and completely indifferent. James Whitmore sat in his study and understood with the particular clarity that comes only from removing every comfortable alternative that the most dangerous place he had ever been in his life was not a courtroom or a failed deal or a market in freefall. It was his own breakfast table in his own home on a beautiful October morning where the butter sat in its white porcelain dish with its silver lid and its perfectly undisturbed surface, and a woman he had trusted with the interior of his life had stood in the dark at 1 in the morning and made careful, practiced, methodical preparations to stop his heart. He thought about Ellie standing beside his chair with her sketch pad pressed against her side. The particular courage of saying what you know when staying quiet would have been so much easier and so much more profitable. He thought about what it had cost her to refuse the money, to cross that kitchen and say quietly and without hesitation what she had seen. He opened the locked drawer of his desk and took out the black notebook, the one he kept for things that needed to be written down rather than stored where other systems could access them. He wrote at the top of a clean page, Serena Voss, and beneath it he began to write everything he knew. The list was already long. It was not yet 10 o'clock in the morning, and it was already clear that the war inside this house had been running for months, patient and invisible, and completely one-sided. Until now. The next morning, James Whitmore came down the stairs more slowly than usual. He held the railing. He paused at the landing, pressing 2 fingers lightly against his sternum, as though testing a discomfort that concerned him. He breathed carefully for a moment, eyes partially closed, and then continued down. He had practiced this in his bedroom before coming out. Not the pretending exactly, but the discipline of it. The particular restraint required to perform convincing weakness. He was a man who had spent 20 years training himself to project certainty in every room he entered, to occupy space in a way that communicated solidity and control. Unlearning that, even temporarily and even deliberately, required a different kind of effort. He reached the kitchen. Serena was already at the counter. She had her back to him, slicing fruit with the focused attention she always brought to small domestic tasks, and she turned when she heard his footsteps on the hardwood. Her face moved through its familiar sequence, the smile first coming quickly, and then the slight narrowing of the eyes that meant she was already measuring something. "You look tired," she said. "I didn't sleep well," James replied. He pulled out his chair and sat down carefully, as though lowering himself into it required more effort than it should. Serena set the knife down and moved toward the coffee machine. Was it the chest thing again? He had told her 3 days ago that he had been feeling occasional pressure behind his sternum. A small disclosure offered casually in the right moment, designed to plant something in receptive ground. He had watched her face when he said it. The concern that appeared there was real in the sense that it was genuine feeling, but it was not the kind that comes from love. It was the kind that comes from watching a process unfold as designed. "A little," he said. "I've made an appointment with the doctor this week. He wants to run some additional tests." Serena placed the coffee in front of him and remained standing at the edge of the table, looking at him with an expression she had assembled with great care. Warmth, worry, the specific tenderness of someone who knows more than they are saying and has shaped their face accordingly. You need to slow down, she said softly. The company has good people. It survives without you micromanaging every detail for a few weeks. Maybe, he said. She went back to the counter and brought him toast and eggs and the sliced fruit. She moved with that fluid, rehearsed ease, setting everything before him with the quiet ceremony of a person who wants to be seen, taking care of someone, who wants the taking care to be witnessed and recorded in the memory of the person being cared for. James looked at the plate. He looked at the butter dish with its silver lid. The doctor mentioned cholesterol, he said, not looking up. Said I should cut back on butter for a while. Apparently it's not as minor a factor as I assumed. A very brief pause. The kind of pause a person makes when an unexpected variable has appeared in a calculation they believed was settled. That seems extreme, Serena said lightly. You barely eat enough as it is. I know, but I'll listen to him. He ate the eggs and some of the fruit. He left the toast. He drank the coffee slowly and he let her watch him, and he could feel her watching with the concentrated attention of someone monitoring an outcome. And he said nothing that was not precisely calibrated to the performance he had decided to give. When she left for the morning, he sat at the empty table and allowed himself to breathe fully for the first time since coming downstairs. Ellie appeared from the hallway a few minutes later, her sketch pad under her arm, and looked at him with that steady attention she had turned on him since the morning before. She kept looking at the toast, Ellie said. Every time you didn't eat it, her face changed a little. I know, James said. I saw it. Ellie sat in her chair by the window. She opened the sketch pad but held the pencil without drawing. Is she going to change what she's doing now that the butter isn't working the way she planned? James looked at his coffee. Almost certainly. When one approach slows down, people who are impatient begin looking for a faster one. That's what I'm expecting from her. He was right about that. He simply did not yet know how quickly the change would come. Owen Briggs arrived before 10, coming through the side entrance with a folder under his arm and the expression of a man who has spent the night finding things he wishes were different. They sat in the study with the door closed, and Owen laid the first document on the desk. The preliminary result came in this morning, Owen said. The butter contained metoprolol. It's a beta blocker used in cardiac medicine. Prescribed appropriately and in proper doses, it manages heart rate and blood pressure in patients with specific conditions. He looked at James. In the concentration present in that dish introduced every morning over a period of months to a person with no cardiac condition who has not been told they are receiving it, the cumulative effect on cardiac function would be a gradual and measurable deterioration, irregular rhythm, persistent fatigue, episodes of dizziness or near syncope. Eventually, if the concentration continued to increase, the risk of a serious and potentially fatal cardiac event would become significant. James did not speak. It would appear in an autopsy, Owen continued, but in a man of your age, with your documented work schedule and stress history, a cardiac event would not automatically trigger a forensic investigation. A standard coroner's finding would almost certainly record it as exactly what it was designed to look like. He paused. Natural causes. The room was very quiet. James reached out and turned the document to face him. He read it once carefully. He set it back on the desk. What else? He said. Owen placed the second document beside the first. 4 months ago, Serena Voss purchased a life insurance policy on your life through a private carrier in Hartford. The policy face value is $5 million. She is the sole primary beneficiary. Owen let the number occupy the air for a moment. The policy was finalized on a Wednesday. The following Monday, she called you at your office and proposed that she take over the morning routine at the house. She said she wanted to feel more settled in advance of the wedding. She said it would be good for both of you. James remembered that call. He had been standing at his office window 14 floors up, the tail end of a conference call still in his ear, and she had said it in that particular register she used when she wanted something to feel small and natural, warm and self-deprecating. He had said yes almost immediately. He had probably smiled. He looked at the date on the insurance document. 4 months ago, she had signed her name to a document making his death worth $5 million, and then 4 days later, she had called and asked to begin making his breakfast. Keep going, he said. Owen placed a third document on the desk. This one required more time to trace because it's buried under 2 separate layers of corporate structure. There is a company called Meridian Advisory registered in Delaware. On paper, it presents as a financial consulting firm. No website, no office of record, no employees listed anywhere. Owen indicated a line on the page. Over the past 8 months, Meridian Advisory has made 11 wire transfers to a private account registered in Serena Voss's name at her former address in New Haven. The transfers range from $12,000 to $31,000 each. Total received over 8 months, just over $240,000. James was very still. Meridian Advisory, Owen said, is owned through a holding company by a man named Douglas Harlan. The name arrived in the room and took up space the way significant names do. James knew it. He had known it for more than a decade and had spent years trying to relegate it to the category of things that no longer required his attention. Names attached to significant betrayals do not relegate easily. Douglas Harlan had been his partner in the early years. Not a close friend of Lassie, but a man he had worked alongside for 3 years during the period when every decision felt weightier than it probably was, and trust was allocated carefully because it was among the few resources he had available to allocate. They had agreed on most things until they disagreed on the central thing, which was whether the company should be built slowly and carefully for lasting value or moved through quickly for immediate return. James had bought him out at a number that was by any objective measure fair. Douglas Harlan had not believed it was fair. That difference of opinion had never been resolved, only set aside under the terms of the buyout agreement. That had been 10 years ago. He knows the company, James said. Everything about it, Owen replied. The share structure, the board composition, the insurance policies, the estate arrangements. He was present during the foundational period when most of the core documents were drafted. He knows precisely what happens to your assets in the event of your death before the wedding versus after it. He knows which accounts transfer automatically and which require probate. He knows which board members would contest a sudden change in leadership and which would align quickly. Owen closed the folder. Serena Voss did not design this. She is the mechanism. Douglas Harlan is the architect. James stood up and walked to the window. He stood looking out at the oak trees along the driveway. The leaves were deeper into their turning now, some of them releasing and drifting in slow arcs across the stone path below. In a few more days, the path would be covered entirely. He thought about Douglas Harlan, 10 years ago, sitting across a conference table, signing the buyout papers with a pen held too tightly, his face carefully arranged into something that was not quite anger and not quite acceptance, but something that lived between them. He had not looked like a man who was finished. He had looked like a man who was being patient, who had decided that patience was the form his response would take. 10 years. He had waited 10 years, and then he had found Serena Voss, and together they had constructed something that was not a relationship. It was a business plan, precise and patient and designed around a specific knowledge of the target. The loneliness had been the door. James understood that now, standing at his window. Not the company, not the specific assets, but the loneliness that had made the company and the assets less interesting than they might have been. The loneliness had been the access point, and Serena Voss had been hired to open it. He turned back to Owen. Track her movements, he said. Anyone she meets outside this house. Any location she visits more than once without mentioning it. Phone records wherever you can access them. He paused. And I want a full accounting of Douglas Harlan's activity over the past 12 months. Where he's been, who he's seen, what he's filed or registered. Owen nodded. One more thing. He produced a single printed sheet from inside the folder. Your blood panel from 6 weeks ago showed the compound at a subclinical but measurable level consistent with 6 to 8 weeks of regular low-dose exposure at that point in time. But if she began the breakfast routine 4 months ago, the current concentration in that butter dish indicates she started at a low dose and has been increasing it incrementally. The implication was exact. She had begun with a dose low enough to produce only explainable fatigue. She had increased it slowly, watching the effects accumulate, watching the man she was scheduled to marry become incrementally more plausible as someone who might simply work himself toward a cardiac event. And she had been doing this for 4 months. Every morning, every carefully prepared plate, every lid lifted and smoothed and replaced. She started before the wedding was announced publicly, James said. Yes, which means the wedding was the cover, not the motive. Owen said nothing because nothing needed to be added. James was quiet for a long moment. Then his face settled into an expression Owen had seen in difficult situations before. The expression of a man who has finished processing what he feels and has begun working with what he knows. Stay close, James said. Things are going to accelerate. They accelerated that same afternoon. He was at his desk in the study when he heard Serena's voice in the kitchen. Low, careful pitch for a specific audience. He moved into the hallway and positioned himself near the door without entering. Serena was crouched down. He could tell from the register of her voice, the angle of it, that she was at a child's level. He could not hear every word, but he heard enough. He heard your job. He heard you understand what I'm asking. He heard this helps him. He heard tomorrow morning put 2 of them in his drink. They dissolve fast. He won't notice. He heard the small sound of an object placed on the counter. Then he heard Ellie's voice, very quiet and carefully steady. Yes, ma'am. He pressed his back against the hallway wall and closed his eyes. She was using Ellie, the child she had already paid once to stay silent, the child she had already threatened in the language of a woman who understands how to make a threat sound like a statement of fact. Now she was handing a 6-year-old girl a bottle of pills and instructions on how to use them because the butter approach was no longer producing results quickly enough. She was putting the mechanism of a murder into a child's hands and calling it medicine. He stood in the hallway and let the silence in the kitchen tell him when they were done. He heard Serena's heels cross the floor, and he moved back toward his study and was seated at his desk by the time she appeared in the doorway. How are you feeling? She asked. A little better, he said. The coffee helped. She gave him a small, careful smile. Rest tonight. She left. James sat at his desk for a full minute without moving. Then he picked up the small device Owen had given him 2 days earlier. It was matte black and no larger than a car key. Owen had positioned an audio sensor in the kitchen behind the row of spice jars on the back of the counter, a location that captured the full length of the counter and the table and the space near the window with clean, unobstructed audio. The device in James's hand was the remote activation trigger. He had pressed it before moving toward the hallway. The recording had been running before Serena crouched down. Whatever she had said to Ellie, it was already captured. He set the device on the desk and looked at it for a moment. Then he went to find Ellie. She was in the small side room off the kitchen, sitting on the low bench near the window. The pill bottle was on the bench beside her, not in her hand, just set there at a careful distance. She was sitting very straight with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the floor, holding something in with a stillness that did not belong to her age. James came in and sat on the bench beside her. He did not say anything right away. He let the room be quiet for a moment. I pressed the button before she started talking, Ellie said without looking up. He looked at her. The keychain. Yes, sir. She reached into her sweater pocket and placed the small keychain recorder on the bench between them. It was warm from her pocket. Before she crouched down, you said to do it before, not after. James picked it up and held it carefully. She wants me to put these in your drink tomorrow morning, Ellie said. She looked at the pill bottle. She said they dissolve fast and you won't notice. She said it helps your heart rest. I know, he said. She said it like she was being kind, Ellie continued, like it was a nice thing to do. She said it flatly, the way a child repeats something that tasted wrong in their mouth. She also said that my mom has been asking for more hours. She said she could make sure that happens, or make sure it doesn't. She looked at James for the first time since he had come in. She didn't say it like a threat. She said it like she was just telling me how things work. James looked at the child beside him, at the careful hands and the steady face and the small device she had activated at exactly the right moment alone in a kitchen with a woman who was administering a murder in increments and explaining it as care. You did everything right, he said. Ellie looked at the pill bottle. What do I do with it? Leave it on the bench. Don't touch it again. He paused. Tomorrow morning, when she asks you to put something in my drink, you'll go through the motion exactly as she expects, and then you'll do what I showed you. She nodded. She had already memorized the sequence. The look of compliance, the careful substitution, the steady expression that gave nothing away. He stood up and picked up the pill bottle with a folded tissue, placed it in a small sealed bag from his jacket pocket. He looked at the keychain recorder in his hand. He thought about what it had cost a 6-year-old girl to press a button at exactly the right moment and then sit on a bench and wait. For the lab, he said, holding up the bag. Ellie nodded. He called Owen from the study 15 minutes later. She's moving faster. James said. She's given Ellie a bottle and asked her to dissolve pills directly into my drink. She's bypassing the butter entirely because I've stopped eating it. The recording from this afternoon captures the full conversation. She's accelerating because the timeline is under pressure, Owen said. Something changed her sense of urgency. I want to know where Douglas Harlan has been physically over the past 2 weeks, James said. Not phone records, physical locations. If he's been near Greenwich at any point, I want to know exactly when. I'll have it by tonight. Owen came to the side entrance at 7:30. Sandra had taken Ellie upstairs. Serena was in the bedroom and the television was audible through the wall. They stood in the utility room and Owen spoke quietly. Douglas Harlan was in Greenwich 4 days ago, Owen said. He drove himself, no driver, no assistant. He parked on Prospect Street, approximately a quarter-mile from the south boundary of your property. He was there for 90 minutes. The parking camera at the corner recorded his entry and exit. James absorbed this without showing it. 4 days ago, the day before I stopped eating the toast, before we had the lab results. Yes. He came to evaluate the progress, and then she increased the dosage immediately after. The concentration in the sample was higher than what the 6-week blood panel suggests the baseline had been, Owen confirmed. She adjusted upward after he was here. James stood in the cool utility room and let the picture complete itself. Douglas Harlan had driven himself to avoid creating records. He had parked far enough away to avoid casual recognition, but close enough to be available. He had spent 90 minutes on either meeting with Serena directly or coordinating with her remotely. And he had given her some form of instruction or deadline because the following morning she had increased the dosage, and less than a week after that she had abandoned the butter approach entirely and begun recruiting a child. Someone had set a deadline. He thought about the garden. He thought about 2 nights ago watching Serena through his window as she walked the path along the rose hedge with her phone pressed to her ear, her body at that particular angle people adopt when they are talking to someone who matters more than they want anyone to know. 10 more days. Make sure the transfers are ready. 10 days. 2 days ago now, which made it 8 days. He thought about what Owen had laid out, the specific legal difference between a man who dies single versus a man who dies married. The accelerated access. The board-level positions that transfer automatically with a surviving spouse's legal standing. The particular speed with which control of a company could be moved before the institutional shock wore off and the right people began asking the right questions. They needed him to be her husband long enough to become her late husband. And someone had decided there were 8 days left in which to make that happen. James returned to his study. He called Margaret Lowe. Margaret had been his legal counsel for 15 years. She was in her late 50s, and she had the kind of intelligence that reveals itself through economy rather than display through saying precisely what is necessary and no more. She answered on the 3rd ring. I need the will changed tonight, or first thing tomorrow morning, James said. Serena Voss removed from any oversight role regardless of marital status at the time of any future event. Everything in trust, you and Owen Briggs as co-executors. No major asset decisions, no share transfers, no board composition, changes for a minimum of 12 months following my death. He paused. I also need the company's share structure reviewed for any provision that might grant a surviving spouse accelerated access. If there is a vulnerability, I need it closed before the end of this week. A long pause. James, Margaret said carefully, this is very precise language for a 42-year-old man in good health. I'm taking precautions, he said. That's all I can give you right now. If this is what I think it might be, when I have everything, I'll give you everything, he said. Right now, I need the documents. She told him she would have a draft by morning. She told him to be careful. He thanked her and ended the call. He sat at his desk without turning on the lamp. He thought about Ellie on the bench with the pill bottle set carefully at a distance, the keychain recorder warm from her pocket. He thought about Sandra, who had worked honestly at 3 jobs and never asked for anything she had not earned, being used as leverage in a negotiation she did not know was happening around her. He thought about Douglas Harlan, sitting in a parked car a quarter-mile away 90 minutes ago and running his calculations. He opened the black notebook. He wrote Douglas Harlan beneath Serena Voss's name. He drew a line connecting them. He wrote Meridian Advisory. $240,000 over 8 months. Payment for performance. He underlined the last word. Then he sat back and let himself feel completely and without management the full weight of what this house had been for the past 4 months. Not a home, a theater, not a relationship, a contract, not a breakfast table. A slow and patient crime scene where the crime had been ongoing every morning while he read his newspaper and drank his coffee and felt in his imperfect and specific way grateful for the company. He let himself feel all of it, and then he closed the notebook. And he called Owen. "Set the table," he said. "I want Douglas Harlan invited to dinner. Day after tomorrow. Tell him I want to discuss the future of the company given my health situation. Tell him I could use the perspective of someone who understands the history of the business." Owen was quiet for a moment. "You want to bring him inside the house?" "Yes. Once he's here, there's no ambiguity about what this becomes." James looked toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms where Serena's television was still audible through the walls. Something soft and domestic, the sound of an ordinary evening in a home where nothing was wrong. "I know exactly what it becomes," he said. He stood up from the desk. He walked to the window. Outside, the oaks were dark shapes against a sky that had gone the deep blue-black of a clear October night. A few stars were visible above the roofline. The driveway was empty, and the gate at the end was closed. James Whitmore stood at his window in the dark and understood that every calm surface in his life right now was calm only because the people who wanted him dead did not yet know that he was watching. They thought the 10 days were counting down in their favor. They did not know the 10 days were counting down in his. He turned off the lamp. He went upstairs. He lay down in the dark and stared at the ceiling and began with the same careful attention he had always brought to the problems that mattered most to plan exactly how this was going to end. The morning of October 16th arrived gray and completely still. No wind, no bird song. The oak trees along the driveway stood without moving, as though they had been consulted about what was coming and had decided that stillness was the appropriate response. A thin layer of mist sat level with the top of the stone wall, and through it the garden appeared as a painting rendered in charcoal and pale green. Everything muted, everything suspended in the particular silence of a morning that is waiting for something to be decided. James Whitmore woke before 5. He did not attempt to go back to sleep. He lay on his back in the dark with his hands folded on his chest and went through the sequence one final time the way a surgeon moves through a procedure in the mind before the first incision. Not because the steps are unknown, because the steps deserve that kind of respect. He thought about what had to happen at 7 o'clock this evening. He thought about every place it could go wrong and what he would do in each of those cases. He thought about a 68-year-old man in a good coat who had sat in a parked car a quarter mile from this house for 90 minutes and counted on the patience of his plan holding together for 8 more days. Tonight, James intended to close those 8 days. He dressed carefully. Dark trousers, a charcoal shirt with no tie, the collar left open at the top. The clothes of a man who is making an effort but running slightly below his usual standard, slightly too tired to be fully formal. He had thought about this too. The performance had to hold until the exact moment it was no longer needed. Serena needed to look across the dinner table tonight and still see the man she believed was declining on the schedule she had designed. He came downstairs at 6:30. Serena was not yet up. The kitchen was empty and pale in the early light, and James stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the room. At the chairs, at the counter, at the space in the center of the table where the butter dish had stood every morning for 4 months. He made his own coffee. He stood at the window and drank it and watched the mist begin to thin and lift over the garden as the light behind it strengthened. Sandra arrived at 7. She came through the side door with her coat still on and looked at James with the expression she had worn for the past 3 days, the expression of a woman carrying something that was not hers to put down until someone told her she could. He had told her only what she needed to know, that tonight there would be a dinner, that there would be guests, that things would change after. She had not asked how. He respected that. Ellie came in behind her mother, her sketch pad under her arm, her school bag over one shoulder. She set both down by the window chair and looked at James with that level, unhurried attention she had brought to everything since the morning she had stood beside his breakfast table with something to say. "Tonight," she said. It was not a question. "Tonight," he confirmed. She nodded once. She sat in her chair and opened the sketch pad and held the pencil lightly without drawing. She looked out the window at the thinning mist and appeared in some way that James could not entirely name to be at peace with what the day held. He thought that was either the bravest thing he had seen in a long time or the saddest. He decided it was both at once. Serena came down at 8:30. She was composed as she always was, hair arranged, a soft gray blouse, the small gold earrings James had given her on her birthday in August, which she had worn every day since. She moved into the kitchen and looked at him and did the measuring thing with her eyes that he had once mistaken for ordinary concern. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," he replied. She poured herself coffee and sat across from him. "You actually look a little better than yesterday," she said lightly. Her eyes said something different. They were assessing. "I feel a little better," he said. He pressed his hand flat on the table, a gesture of mild reassurance. "I reached out to an old colleague last night, Douglas Harlan. I don't think I've mentioned him to you." A fraction of a second, the smallest possible hesitation, the length of time it takes for a trained person to suppress a reaction that almost escaped them. "I don't think so," she said. "Should I know him?" "We built the company together in the early days," James said, keeping his voice reflective and slightly tired, the voice of a man thinking out loud about his past. "We had a falling out eventually, a business disagreement. He wanted to go in a different direction. But he knows the company structure better than almost anyone still living who isn't currently on my payroll." He looked at his coffee. "I've been thinking about what happens to everything if my health gets worse. I don't want to leave things complicated or contested. I thought having someone like Douglas at the table might be useful. Someone who understands the mechanics and the history." Serena looked at him. For a moment, just a single visible moment, her face went entirely still. Then it rearranged itself into something that resembled gentle, practical agreement. "That makes sense," she said. "When were you thinking?" "Tonight," James said. 7 o'clock. I already called him this morning." He said yes. She nodded slowly. "I'll make sure the table is set properly." He watched her pick up her coffee cup and take a small sip. Her hands were steady. Her expression was contained. She was very good. He had always recognized that she was good at certain things. He simply had not known until recently what those things were. After she left the kitchen, James looked at Ellie. Ellie was still looking at the doorway where Serena had been standing. "Her face changed when you said his name," Ellie said quietly. "Yes." She knew exactly who he was. "Yes." Ellie looked back at her sketch pad. "She's going to call him as soon as she's out of the house." She said it the way she said most things, as a statement of what was plainly true rather than a speculation. "I know," James said. "That's what I want her to do." Owen arrived at noon. They sat in the study with the door locked, and Owen laid out the architecture of the evening with the methodical precision of someone who has planned operations in conditions where improvisation is expensive. Two officers from the Connecticut State Police would arrive at 6:30 before Douglas Harlan was scheduled to appear. They would position themselves in the living room adjacent to the dining room. Owen would be with them. The dining room door would remain slightly open throughout the dinner, sufficient for clean audio transmission to the officers inside. The recording system would run continuously from 6 o'clock onward. But the butter dish was the critical element, the thing that would determine whether everything else held up under the pressure of a skilled defense attorney in a two-party consent state. James had spoken with Ellie early that morning before Serena came down. She had told him what had happened 3 days earlier when Serena had instructed her to dispose of the butter dish, to put it in the outside bin because the butter was old. He had asked her if she had done so. She had looked at him with those level eyes and said no. She had put it in a box. She had put the box in the cabinet under the utility room sink behind the cleaning supplies. She had wrapped it in a plastic bag first. He had looked at her for a long moment. He had told her he did not know many adults who would have thought to do that. She had shrugged in the particular way children shrug when something seemed obvious to them. She had said he told her everything in the house was evidence now. She had taken the instruction literally. She had done precisely what the instruction required. Owen confirmed from the lab the original butter dish produced with a clean chain of custody anchored to a single uncoached child with no legal history and no motive to fabricate constituted physical evidence of a categorically different order than the sample James had secured on day one. It was untouched. The surface had been disturbed only by the implement Serena had used to smooth it. Her fingerprints were on the lid and on the side of the dish. No one else had touched it since that night. No break in the chain. Douglas Harlan's attorney could argue two-party consent laws in Connecticut until the courtroom lights were turned off. He could not argue his way around a physical object preserved by a 6-year-old child in a box under a utility room sink because a man told her the truth was worth keeping. Owen left at 3. He would return at 6:15. The afternoon passed slowly, the way afternoons pass when what you are waiting for is significant. James worked through papers in his study. He called Margaret Lowe and confirmed that the will revisions were finalized and on file. He called Dr. Alden and told him only that the matter related to his recent blood work was being addressed. He sat at his desk and looked at the black notebook and the two names written at the top of the page and the lines beneath them, and then he closed it. At 4:30, Serena knocked on the study door and told him she was going to the village to pick up some things for dinner. She said it easily, like a woman running a simple errand. She said she would be back by 6. James said that sounded fine. He waited 7 minutes after he heard her car reach the road. Then he went to find Ellie. She was in the utility room. She was standing in front of the cabinet under the sink looking at it as though she had been standing there for a while. When James came in, she turned and looked at him. She did not say anything. She reached down, opened the cabinet, pulled out a plastic bag, and from inside it, a small cardboard box. She set the bowl on the counter and opened it. The butter dish sat inside it. White porcelain, silver lid. The surface as it had been on the morning of October 14th when James had first reached for the butter knife and heard a small voice tell him to stop. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked at Ellie. "You kept it safe," he said. She nodded. "You said everything is evidence." He placed his hand briefly on her shoulder. Then he picked up the box carefully and carried it to his study where he photographed it from multiple angles with his phone time-stamped, documenting the box, the dish inside the cabinet. It had come from the plastic bag it had been stored in. He placed the box on the corner of his desk where he could reach it easily tonight. He sat down and breathed. He thought about 20 years of building something from nothing, the specific discipline of it, the early mornings when the numbers were not yet cooperating, and the late nights when the structure of a deal would rearrange itself in his mind until the flaw became visible and the solution appeared. The private pride of watching something grow because you had understood it clearly and been willing to do the work that understanding required. He thought about what it would have looked like from the outside, the obituary, the tasteful service. The board meeting 3 days later, where Serena Voss would sit in the chair with the weight of fresh grief and the legal standing of a surviving spouse, and begin very quietly to make the calls that would set Douglas Harlan's plan into its final phase. He sat with that image for 1 full minute. Then he set it aside. He had work to do. Owen arrived at 6:15 with 2 officers from the Connecticut State Police. One was a woman named Reyes in her mid-40s with a face that had learned to reveal very little and a manner that suggested she had heard most things before and was unlikely to be surprised. The other was a younger man named Calloway, who had the particular steadiness of someone trained to wait in situations where waiting is what the operation requires. Owen made the introductions briefly and without ceremony. The officers moved to the living room and positioned themselves near the wall adjacent to the dining room door. They would hear everything. The recording system went live at 6 o'clock. Serena returned at 10 past 6. She moved through the kitchen, quickly arranging the table settings she had bought in the village opening, wine placing things with efficient precision. She was slightly elevated in the way people are when they are more invested in an outcome than they want anyone to see. She changed into a dark dress. She checked the table settings twice. James sat in the living room and watched her move through the house. He thought about the word performance, which he had used with Ellie in the beginning. Everything in this house is a performance now. He had been correct about that. He simply had not anticipated how long a performance could run before the stage finally gave out under it. At 7 minutes past 7, the gate buzzer sounded. Douglas Harlan arrived in a black sedan. He drove himself as he apparently always did when discretion was the priority. He was 68 years old, tall, silver-haired, and he moved through the world with the unhurried confidence of someone who had spent most of his adult life operating from a position of sufficient advantage. That urgency was rarely required. He wore a dark overcoat over a navy suit, and he shook James's hand at the door with a grip that was slightly too firm, in the particular way of men who have decided that firmness communicates something important about them. "James," he said, "it's been a long time." It has, James agreed. Douglas looked around the entrance hall with the easy appreciation of someone assessing a property. Remarkable house, he said. You always had a good eye. Come in, James said. Serena's just finishing up in the kitchen. Douglas followed him into the dining room. He took in the table, the wine already poured, the candles lit against the October darkness outside the windows. He moved to a chair and stood behind it with the comfortable possession of a man who has already decided how the evening is going to proceed. Serena came in. She greeted Douglas with warmth that was calibrated with great care. Familiar but not overtly so. The warmth of two people who know each other in a way they are currently choosing not to acknowledge in front of a third person. James watched them exchange their brief, careful pleasantries, and he noted the specific geometry of it, the tiny shared vocabulary of people who have spoken privately and recently and are now maintaining a performance that has its own pressures. The way Douglas angled his body toward her slightly when James's attention appeared to drift. The way Serena's hand rested on the back of her chair at an angle that suggested anchoring rather than comfort. They sat. The wine was poured. The food was on the table. The candles burned in the windless room. Outside the tall windows, the October night was fully dark, and the oak trees were shapes against it. And the house that James Whitmore had spent 7 years building his life in out of held its breath around him. Dinner began. Douglas was a practiced conversationalist, the kind of man who has used dinner tables as extensions of the negotiating room for so long that the transition between the two is no longer visible. He moved through topics with easy authority. He asked about the company's recent performance and offered observations about the commercial real estate market with the confidence of someone who once had a hand in building it. He refilled his wine glass with relaxed certainty. He was charming in the specific way of men who have learned that charm is a tool rather than a quality. James gave him 30 minutes. He had decided on 30 minutes in advance. Enough time for the table and the candlelight and the wine to do their predictable work on a man who was comfortable and believed himself in control. Then he set his fork down. He looked at Douglas. He looked at Serena. He spoke without raising his voice. I know about the butter, he said. The table did not change physically. The candles continued their slow burning. The wine glasses sat where they had been placed. But something in the room shifted with those 5 words, the way a room shifts when a window is opened and the sealed pressure inside adjusts to meet the outside air. Douglas did not move. Serena's hand stopped on the tablecloth. I know about the metoprolol in the butter dish, James continued. I know about the life insurance policy for $5 million finalized on a Wednesday 4 months ago, and I know that the following Monday, you called my office and asked to start making breakfast. He looked at Serena. The color in her face was leaving quickly. I know about Meridian Advisory. I know about the $240,000 transferred to your account over 8 months. He looked at Douglas. I know that Meridian Advisory is yours. I know why you waited until I was in what you had calculated to be an emotionally accessible period. I know you were parked on Prospect Street 4 days ago for 90 minutes. I know about the phone call in the garden. 10 more days. Make sure the transfers are ready. He folded his hands on the table in front of him. I know all of it. A silence settled over the table. Douglas Harlan picked up his wine glass. He took a measured sip. He set it down and looked at James with an expression that contained something almost like appreciation. That, he said calmly, is a very detailed accounting. It is, James agreed. And I imagine you believe you have evidence to support it. Douglas glanced toward the wall in a way that was almost imperceptible, the assessment of a man who does not miss environmental details. A recording, perhaps. Some financial documentation. He opened his hands in a gesture of mild concession. Here is the problem, James. Connecticut is a 2-party consent state. Any audio recording made inside a private residence without the knowledge of all parties present is inadmissible in criminal proceedings. Full stop. No good defense attorney loses on that basis. He looked at James with the patient confidence of a man delivering facts to someone who should have known them already. The butter dish. Your security handled it. You handled it. A private lab analyzed it with no court oversight and no chain of custody protocols. No defense attorney in this state loses on those grounds either. He leaned back in his chair slightly. I think you have frightened yourself into seeing a pattern where the evidence doesn't actually support one. I think the stress of your health situation has affected your judgment in a way that is understandable, but not supported by anything that would survive scrutiny. He reached back for his coat on the chair behind him. Serena exhaled slowly. Something in her posture eased. Douglas began to rise. And that was the exact moment the dining room door opened. Ellie walked in. She was wearing her school sweater, the navy blue one with a small white stripe at the cuff. Her hair was slightly loose on the left side. She was carrying a cardboard box in front of her with both hands the way a child carries something they have been trusted with and intend to deliver intact. She walked to the dining table and set the box on the surface and looked at James. Miss Serena told me to throw this away 3 days ago, Ellie said. Her voice was level and clear. She said the butter was old and I should put it in the outside bin so it was gone. She looked at the box. But you told me everything in this house is evidence, so I kept it. She opened the box. The white porcelain butter dish sat inside it. The silver lid was on. The surface was as it had been on the morning of October 14th, undisturbed smooth, the faint trace of a spoon stroke visible only at the edge near the rim where the final pass had been marginally uneven. James looked at Serena. Serena looked at the dish. The color that had begun to return to her face departed again completely. One person touched this dish on the night of October 13th, James said quietly. The kitchen camera shows exactly who that was, and the footage is time-stamped and stored on a system that was never in anyone else's custody. The dish has been sealed inside this box in a location that no one in this room except Ellie has accessed since the following morning. The chain of custody begins and ends with a child who has no criminal record, no legal history, no prior relationship with law enforcement, and no conceivable motive to fabricate. He paused. Her fingerprints are not on it. My prints are not on it. Owen's prints are not on it. He looked at Douglas. Hers are. On the lid, on the side. Nowhere else in the room. Douglas Harlan had stopped moving toward his coat. He was looking at the dish in the box on the table. His face had undergone a change that was more interesting to observe than Serena's, because it was more controlled and therefore revealed more about the man underneath the control. It was not panic, it was not remorse. It was the expression of a man who has been running a precise calculation and has just discovered that one of his foundational variables was wrong. The specific cold recalibration of a patient and careful person confronting a detail he had not thought to account for. Douglas, Serena's voice had changed entirely. The smoothness was gone and what was underneath it was something raw and cornered. Douglas, tell them. Tell them this was your plan. Tell them what you told me to do, all of it. Douglas looked at her. He said nothing. You told me the dosage, Serena said. The words were coming faster now, the careful construction of months fracturing under the weight of what was sitting in a cardboard box on the dinner table in front of her. You told me the timing. You told me exactly what to say to him, what to give him, how to manage the routine. You designed the whole thing before I even understood what I was agreeing to. Serena, Douglas said with a calm that was almost clinical, stop talking. You said it would look natural, she continued as though the instruction had not registered. You said men his age with his schedule, with his stress history, this is exactly how they go. You said if I followed your sequence exactly, it would be finished before anyone had a reason to look at it closely. That is enough, Douglas said. His voice carried an edge now. You paid me $240,000 to do this, Serena said. You told me I was just accelerating something that was going to happen anyway. You said he was going to work himself into a cardiac event inside of 5 years regardless. And we were just, I said that is enough. You said it was practically a kindness, she said. The dining room was completely still. Douglas Harlan stood beside his chair with his hand on his coat. In the stillness of a man who has just heard himself described in exact and incriminating detail in a room that has been recording everything and who is now making a very final calculation about options and finding that the options are not what he expected them to be. Owen stepped through the doorway. Behind him, Reyes and Calloway came into the room. Reyes looked at the table, at the box with the butter dish, at the two people standing on the far side of it, at the man with his hand on his coat who was making the calculation she had seen made many times before in various rooms, always at the moment the person making it understood that the calculation had already been completed by someone else and the results had not gone in their favor. Douglas Harlan, she said. Serena Voss, I need both of you to step away from the table. Douglas looked at James. For the first time across all the years they had known each other, the composure was entirely absent. What was underneath it was not remorse. It was not regret. It was something harder and smaller, the specific and concentrated fury of a patient man who had planned carefully and over a long period and had been defeated by a detail he had categorized as inconsequential. A 6-year-old child, a cardboard box, a literal interpretation of a simple instruction. James held his gaze across the table. You stopped paying attention to what was actually in the room, James said quietly. Douglas said nothing. He moved back from the chair. Calloway stepped toward him. Serena did not move for a moment. She stood at the far side of the table looking at James with a face from which every constructed expression had finally been removed. What remained was stripped and cornered and afraid in the particular way of someone who has been performing so long that the removal of the performance leaves very little. I wouldn't have let it go all the way, she said. The words were small, smaller than anything she had said in the 14 months he had known her. There was a point where I would have stopped. You have to know that. James looked at her. He thought about the phone call in the garden. 10 more days. Make sure the transfers are ready. He thought about a bottle of pills placed in a child's hand with careful instructions. He thought about the security footage and the spoon moving back and forth across the butter at 1 in the morning with the patience of someone who has done this many times and knows exactly how much pressure is needed. He did not say anything. Reyes moved to Serena's side. Serena allowed her hands to be taken. She did not resist. She looked down at the tablecloth for a moment, and then she looked toward the dining room door and saw Ellie standing in the doorway. Still, watching. Something shifted in Serena's face. The fear moved and something uglier took its place. You, she said. Ellie did not move. She did not look away. You could have had a different life, Serena said. Her voice was low and compressed. Both of you. Your mother works herself down to nothing cleaning other people's houses. You were going to do the same thing. I was handing you a way out of that, and you threw it away. She looked at Ellie with something that was trying to be contempt, but was landing much closer to desperation. You chose honesty over everything that could have changed your life. People like you never get ahead. That's just the way things work. The room was very quiet. Ellie stood in the doorway in her school sweater, with her hands at her sides, and she looked at the woman who had given her money and threatened her mother, and placed a bottle of pills in her hand and asked her to help end a man's life. She looked at her without anger and without fear, with something that required more of her than either of those things. My mom says Ellie said that money that comes from hurting people isn't a blessing. It's a debt. She paused. She says you carry it until it's paid. Serena looked at her for a long moment. Then Reyes placed a firm guiding hand on her arm and moved her toward the door. James stepped to stand beside Ellie. He did not speak. He simply positioned himself between her and the room and stayed there until Serena was gone, and the sound of her heels on the hardwood had traveled down the hallway and the front door had opened and closed. Douglas Harlan left without speaking again. Calloway walked at his side. The black sedan that had been parked in the driveway was guided down the long, oak-lined approach by a patrol car that had been waiting at the gate since 6:15. Owen came back into the dining room and looked at James. The lab will need to formally process the dish, Owen said. I know. Have them contact Margaret first. She'll handle the coordination. Owen nodded. He picked up the box, carefully holding it from the sides. He carried it out. James stood alone in the dining room. The candles were still burning. 3 wine glasses sat on the table, 2 of them used, one of them untouched. The food was mostly as it had been abandoned mid-meal. The table had the quality of all dinner tables at the moment. A difficult conversation ends. Ordinary objects left in place after the purpose that brought people to them has departed. Sandra appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had been in the house throughout all of it and had stayed in the kitchen because that was what he had asked, and because staying in her place and doing what was asked of her quietly was among the most fundamental things about her. She looked at the dinner table and then at James with the expression of a woman who is trying to understand what has just ended and what it cost to end it. It's done, James said. She nodded. Take Ellie home tonight, he said. Both of you sleep. Sandra looked at him for a moment. Are you all right, Mr. Whitmore? He considered the question with the honesty it deserved. Not yet, he said, but I will be. She took Ellie home. James sat alone in the dining room for a long time. He did not blow out the candles right away. He sat at the table and looked at the room and thought about the dinners that had happened here over the years. Business conversations, evenings alone with a book and a simple meal. The quiet of a house that belonged to him in the specific and uncomplicated way that things belong to you when you built them yourself. He thought about how long a person can sit with something they do not yet know and mistake the sitting for contentment. Eventually, he blew out the candles. He went to the study, opened the black notebook, and drew a single horizontal line across both names on the page. One clean line. He closed the notebook and put it in the drawer. He called Margaret Lowe, told her it was done, and that she would be contacted tomorrow regarding the evidence chain. He thanked her and ended the call. He sat for a while in the dark without turning on the lamp. He thought about what Owen had said early in this, when the shape of it was still forming. The most dangerous people are the ones who learn your routines, who know when you wake up and what you eat and when you are alone. He thought about a child standing beside a breakfast table with a sketch pad pressed against her side and a piece of information that could have made her life significantly easier to sit on, deciding in some private interior way that she was not going to sit on it. He thought about the moment she made that decision. He was grateful for it in the way you are grateful for things that cannot be expressed proportionately. You simply carry them. He turned off the lamp. He went upstairs. He lay in the dark and listened to the house around him, the settling sounds of it, the particular silence of a building in autumn. And for the first time in many months, the silence felt like his own. 3 months later, James drove out of Greenwich on a clear January morning. The sky was the particular blue that January produces when the air is cold and dry, and the light has a sharpness to it that summer never quite achieves. He drove with the window down a few inches, letting the cold come in. He had been doing that more lately, keeping the window open even in cold weather, staying more awake to what was outside. He turned onto a road 20 minutes from the estate into a neighborhood of modest, well-kept houses with small yards and sidewalks where people left their bicycles near the front steps. The kind of street where people noticed when a neighbor's lights stayed off too long and did something about it. He parked in front of a house with white siding and a front door painted a particular shade of blue. It was a good color, warm without being insistent, the kind of color chosen by someone who wants a place to feel genuinely theirs. He was still looking at the door when it opened. Ellie stood on the front step in a red sweater, her sketch pad under her arm. She looked at him with those steady eyes and did not seem surprised to see him, which confirmed that she had been watching for him. "You're early," she said. "I know," he said. "Is that all right?" She stepped back to let him in. The house smelled of fresh paint and something good cooking in the kitchen and had the particular quality of a place that is in the process of becoming itself. Pictures waiting to be hung. A small stack of books on the floor beside the bookshelf that had not yet been organized. Curtains new enough that they still held the memory of their fold. Sandra came out of the kitchen with a dish towel over her shoulder and the expression she always wore when she was caught, not expecting company, which shifted quickly when she recognized him. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, "you didn't have to make the drive." "I wanted to see the place," he said. "How are you settling in?" "Better than I expected," she said, and something in her face confirmed it. Something that had not been in her face in the 4 years she had worked at the estate was there now. The particular ease of a person who is only in one place at a time, who does not have to be somewhere else in 3 hours. "Ellie likes the school. Her teacher says she's reading 2 grade levels ahead." "I'm not surprised," James said. He sat at the small round kitchen table. It was plain and unpretentious, and he felt more comfortable sitting at it than he had felt at his own long dining table in months. Sandra made coffee. Ellie sat across from him and opened her sketch pad on the table. She was drawing a house simple and careful with a door and a window and a tree positioned to the left of it, with branches that went up and out in a way that suggested the tree was doing well. "How is the trial going?" she asked. She asked it the way she asked most things, with the directness of someone who has considered the question and decided it is worth asking. "Slowly," James said. "These proceedings take time, but it's moving in the right direction." She nodded. She added a detail to the tree in her drawing. "Owen says the recording combined with the dish is more than enough," she said. "He says there isn't much room left for them to argue." "Owen is right about that," James said. She nodded again and went back to her drawing. Sandra sat down with her own coffee, and the three of them stayed at the small table for a while in a silence that required nothing from anyone. James had reached an age at which he understood the specific value of a room where nothing needed to be performed, where the people present were exactly who they appeared to be, where the food on the table was just food. "Ellie," he said. She looked up. "When this began," he said, "you told me you didn't do it because of what I had. You said you did it because she tried to buy you." Ellie nodded. "I've thought about that a great deal since then," he said. "I've thought about it more than almost anything else from that time." He set his coffee cup down. "Most of the people I've worked with in my life made their decisions based on what a thing was worth to them. That is not a criticism. That is simply how most people navigate the world, and it is not wrong." He looked at her. "But you made your decision based on something that wasn't in the calculation at all." Ellie was listening with the full attention she brought to things she thought mattered. "You decided that who you were was worth more than what you were being offered," he said. "That is not a common thing to find, in adults or in children." Ellie looked at her drawing for a moment. "My mom says if you sell your conscience, you don't get it back," she said. "She says it's the one thing you can't replace or rebuild." Sandra looked at her daughter with the quiet and complicated pride of a woman who has raised a child largely on her own and watched that child become something she hoped for but did not know how to engineer. James sat at the small kitchen table in the January light and held his coffee in both hands and thought about all of it. The butter dish, and the camera, and the lab results, and the recording, and the dinner table with its candles still burning after everyone had left. The whole long, careful, terrible sequence. And at the very beginning of it, before any of the rest of it was possible, and a 6-year-old child standing beside a breakfast table with a sketch pad under her arm, and the particular kind of courage that is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something matters more than the fear does. "Your mother is right," he said. He finished his coffee. He stayed for another hour. He looked at Ellie's drawings. He talked with Sandra about the neighborhood and the school, and the small, ordinary things of a life that was finding its shape in a new place. When he stood to leave, Sandra walked him to the blue door and shook his hand and thanked him again for what he had done for them. He told her again what he had told her before, that she had it backward. He walked to his car and stood beside it in the January air and looked back at the house with the blue door and the white siding and the tree in the yard that was bare now in winter, but that would be something in spring. He thought about what it means to build something, not a company, not a portfolio of properties whose combined value could be expressed in a number, but a life, the patient, specific daily work of choosing each time the choice is available what kind of person you intend to be. He thought about Douglas Harlan and the 10 years he had spent waiting for his moment, and how in the end the whole careful structure had come apart, not because of a lawyer or a lab or a security system or a financial investigation, but because of a cardboard box that a child had placed in a cabinet under a utility room sink in a plastic bag she had thought to wrap around it first. He thought about the expression on Douglas Harlan's face at the moment he understood what was in the box. The private and complete collapse of a patient man who had not thought to account for the possibility that a child would take an instruction literally and act on it alone. He got into the car. He sat for a moment without starting the engine. He had spent 20 years learning to see value in things that other people had decided were not worth looking at carefully. Empty buildings, overlooked markets, opportunities that required a different quality of attention than the attention most people were willing to bring. He had spent 20 years looking for what others missed. He had missed the most obvious thing in his own home. The morning light in the kitchen that he had designed. The chair by the window that he had brought from the study because a child mentioned, and without complaint, that she liked being near the light. The small, steady person who had sat in that chair with her green pencil and her sketch pad and her dark, serious eyes, drawing things and watching things and understanding things that the adults around her had not yet understood. He would not miss things like that again. He started the engine and pulled away from the curb slowly, and in the rearview mirror, the house with the blue door grew smaller as the street curved, and then the curve completed, and it was gone, and James Whitmore drove back toward Greenwich on a clear January morning, with the window open and the cold air coming in, and the road ahead completely visible, paying attention to everything which was different from being afraid, and which was, he had come to understand, the only kind of safety that was real.